My Gavanen Melonin, and well met indeed. I am Arachia Galadirthan, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome to the start of a new, hopefully lengthy series into the delvings of the lore of Middle-earth, as we start a series that overviews each individual nation or geographical location within Middle-earth that then Divide and Conquer has got a faction based upon for our mod. So this video will be in two parts. The first half of the video will be everything we know from a purely lore-based standpoint of a certain faction or location in Middle-earth, and then there is a clear break. And the second half will be then what we have done in Divide and Conquer to build upon that lore to create a faction that works better in a Total War setting or indeed just in a game setting. So if you are on the channel for the lore videos only, then perhaps only the first part will entertain you of each of these videos. And of course, if you play Divide and Conquer, you might find the whole thing entertaining. Now, I'm starting off with Gundabad because they're a new faction over in Divide and Conquer for us, and this has been a week of Gundabad-related videos, so I'm going to cover them. Now, do allow me to state before we dive into this potentially 26-episode-long series that certain factions will have very small videos, and today's is one such, which is why I wanted to include this explanation in the Gundabad video, because the Gundabad video will be short. The basis in terms of the actual video footage is like other lore videos. On the screen, whilst I'm talking about Gundabad, will be various images created by artists around Lord of the Rings. And then when we jump over to the second half, it will just be the campaign map from Divide and Conquer. So I can talk about certain ancillaries and generals and names and places. But I think that is pretty much everything to say. I don't hope to do these once a week. I will try my utmost, but this is a hobby of mine, as I've always said, and I'm getting busier and busier, and I'm never going to treat this like a job, because then I'll definitely stop doing it. So they will come as and when, but I do hope, as I say, to cover each faction. Certain factions I'm looking at Rohan and Gondor particularly, may well, of course, be possibly split into more videos. It depends how much I try and refine their history into a single introductory explanation, if you will, of that faction. But as I say, with Gundabad, we won't have that trouble. So without any further ado, of course, if you have any questions, please do pop them in the comments below, and I'll get round to answering them as and when I can. And of course, I will do what I can to make sure that the artists' names are on the video. They will appear as subtitles, but of course, if you take umbrage with any of the videos, any of the images shown in the video, please do just contact me, and I can arrange to remove them, edit them, add further credit, do what must be done. Alrighty then, so without any further ado, let's kick off with Gundabad. So, Gundabad, or more specifically, Mount Gundabad. For Gundabad was never really a nation in its own right, and always pertained to the mountain that obviously it takes its name from. It first appears in the histories of Middle-earth way back before the years of the sun, and back in the years of the trees, with the awakening of the dwarves, some time after the awakening of the elves. Of course, as you all will well know by now, the dwarves awoke in pairs, save for the seventh and last Durin, of course the father of the Longbeards, who awoke at Mount Gundabad. But that is it. He did not stay there. They didn't build a town, they didn't build or a mansion, as they're called in Dwarven parlance. He immediately left, and of course established out way further south, upon the shores of Keled the great mansions of Khazad-dûm. But Mount Gundabad retains its almost closest thing, I would say, to a religious bend that the dwarves could have, my own opinion, because it is stated that throughout the time of the dwarves, up until, of course, the late Third Age, which is where we basically next joined Gundabad, but throughout Gundabad's history after Durin left and before the orcs came, it was actually used as a location for the 7 clans to actually meet, and it is said expressly, though these places of awakening were far sundered, the dwarves of different kindreds were in communication, and in the early ages often held assemblies of delegates at Mount Gundabad. So we know that although there's no town or established dwelling there, it is still important to the dwarves, and it is a location for essentially their diplomats to meet. I presume because it is suggested that the Blue Mountains are as far away from Gundabad as the Red Mountains are to the east, although the Red Mountains are actually a little further. But I assume Gundabad is a relatively safe and sort of central location for the seven clans to meet. So throughout the First Age, in the years of the Sun, much of the story, for example from the Silmarillion, and indeed right up to the fall of Beleriand, Gundabad, we have no information whatsoever on what happens in Gundabad, but it is obviously at this time still assumed, given that the delegates are meeting there, that throughout the First and Second Age it is held by the dwarves. However, at some point in the Second Age or the early Third Age, it came to be a stronghold of the orcs. Now, it could potentially, again, my opinion, I would feel the most likely time for this to happen would be after the Sundering of Beleriand, and because, of course, many orcs will have fled from Beleriand, and we already know that, of course, many of the servants of Melkor did get away, and there's no reason to suggest the orcs wouldn't as well, and it naturally lies in the path of fleeing, of anyone fleeing Beleriand, because, of course, Beleriand is located to the northwest of Middle-earth. The majority of Beleriand is far, far further north than most of Middle-earth. So it's a natural path for anyone to flee. And therefore I would suggest that it's likely around this time that the orcs managed to take it. Of course, with the fall of Beleriand, Ered Luin is left in ruins, and many of the dwarves flee from there as well, establishing themselves in Khazad-dûm. So the orcs would avoid Khazad-dûm, and so I think it likely that around the end of the First Age, or certainly in the early years of the Second Age, it probably comes under orc control. That is my own hypothesis. What we 100% know is that by the time of the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, it is an orcish stronghold. Not just an orcish town, but it is a very important location in orcish society, I suppose, for want of a much better word. So we're now talking 2,793 years into the Third Age. So an incredibly long time since Durin awoke. Over 6,000 years. Likely over 8 to 10,000 years. And we know that at this time, in the late Third Age, it is held by the orcs. Of course, in the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, all of the mountains are utterly scoured of orcs. The dwarves leave none alive, and Gundabad must be cleansed, or we know it is cleansed, and therefore devoid of orcs. However, upon the success, in inverted commas, of the Battle of Azanulbazar, where of course many dwarves paid with their lives at the final battle of the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, the dwarves do not hold on to Gundabad, and they return to their mansions in the east, west and south. Because of course at the time of the War of Dwarves and Orcs, the dwarves from the Oricani Mountains, the Red Mountains, do partake in that battle. It's one of the only times that all 7 clans are actually featured in the story at one point, which is interesting. But it's not expanded upon that much. But anyway, so we know that Gundabad is cleansed in this time. Now, by the year 2941, so only really 140 years later, Gundabad has not only rebuilt itself as an orcish stronghold, but it is also now said to be the capital of the orcs in the north. And this is, of course, the Battle of the 5 Armies. A large host comes from Gundabad to partake in said battle. Or a vast host is assembled in Gundabad to do war on all the free peoples. But as I say, Gundabad is listed as their capital. So the Battle of the 5 Armies, of course, goes ill for the orcs, but Gundabad is left entirely alone. And indeed, as we then head into the War of the Ring, some 60, 70 years later, Gundabad doesn't feature in the story at all. Not until, of course, the success of Aragorn and Frodo and those against Sauron. So throughout the Third Age, Gundabad is very much an orcish stronghold. And that is all that we know of the Great Mountain. I can't even give you any solid theories on whether or not the dwarves actually built houses there, whether any of them lived there at any time whatsoever. All we know is that they assembled there sometimes to have these grand clan meetings. And that's it. And then it essentially falls into orc hands and remains that way for much of the rest of the histories. So that is Mount Gundabad from a purely lore perspective. I told you it'd be brief. And now, with a wonderful ripple effect, we shall jump over to what Divide and Conquer has done to adapt this lore for our faction. Welcome then to the Divide and Conquer version of this Gundabad faction. Because of course, I shall only say this in this episode, but every topic that is discussed in these episodes are of course then translated to factions that are playable in the mod Divide and Conquer, which obviously brings Middle-earth to the Medieval 2 Total War game engine. So the differences from our point of view for Gundabad are only toward the very end of the Third Age. We follow the same pattern that Durin awakens here in the Great Mountain itself, then he heads far to the south and sets up Khazad-dûm, of course, outside of the Mirror, the Great Lake. Or I always think of it more of a pond than a lake, really. Anyway. And of course, other dwarves awaken far in the Blue Mountains, in Nogrod and Belagost, and far, far, far away to the east are the Red Mountains, where the other dwarves awaken. We have no changes there. Of course, the First and Second Ages we have no changes whatsoever there. And it all comes down to the Third Age after the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. Now, not the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, sorry, at the Battle of Five Armies. And that is because whilst Gundabad musters a grand army that is set to assail the south in the Divide and Conquer lore, and the twist to the others is that we say that that army indeed does leave out to assail the south and partake in the Battle of the Five Armies, whereupon it is utterly crushed, leaving Gundabad completely devoid of life again, save for a few that of course stayed behind. The hatred between the orcs and the dwarves was such that the mountain was utterly emptied in order to see Erebor come to destruction finally. Smaug did a lot, but the orcs wanted to finish the job, and so Gundabad was emptied. It is into this empty arena that we bring the Snow Orcs. So the Snow Orcs are, of course, Gundabad's main warriors, their leaders, their rulers, and Divide and Conquer takes a few twists and turns to make them fit a bit better. Chief amongst these is that we say that Azog and Bolg were both Snow Orcs, and so they were the only ones that had come to Middle-earth until the full migration happened. Now, if we take it a little further back, all the way to the fall of Beleriand, this is where we say the Snow Orcs come from. And so Beleriand has been destroyed in the Great War of Wrath. The Valar have cast out Melkor beyond the void, and his armies are scattered, divided, leaderless, to quote Elrond, and they are all fleeing to Middle-earth. It is in this great maelstrom of peoples coming and going that the Snow Orcs are diverted into the far frozen north, the lands that became Forodwaith, which I think literally means northern wastes. Translated from Sindarin. Forod is certainly northern. Anyway. This is where they then reside for a considerable amount of time, forming and adapting over time, evolving, one would say, to become these hardier breed of orcs who survive in the utter cruelty and bitter lifestyle that the northern fringes brings. However, as we say, Azog is then the first to return to Middle-earth. We don't really give a reason as to why we've selected Azog as a emissary, if you will, to come to the south. But Azog, being this bigger and stronger breed of orc, is able to swiftly take control of the orcs of Khazad-dûm, which of course he does. This is where he then slays all over the place. Thorin's grandfather, Thrain, Thror. Which one's his father? Which one's his grandfather? I can't remember. Anyway, of course, Azog kills... I think it's Thror, isn't it? I should remember, but I can't off the top of my head. And this obviously kicks off the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, where Azog is eventually slain by, of course, Dane Ironfoot upon the steps of Khazad-dûm itself. Years later, Bolg, his son, then leads the armies in the Battle of Five Armies outside the gates of Erebor. And of course, Bolg came with Azog when they both came south from the Snow Orc tribes of the north. And Bolg grew alongside with Azog and was there at the Battle of Azanulbizar, and of course then had fiery determination to exact revenge upon the dwarves. He doesn't do that, of course. He is slain himself. And it's then this triggering event that then brings the Snow Orcs to Middle-earth. In our universe, or the DaC verse, as I will probably often refer to it, the news eventually returns to the Snow Orc tribes from a few other emissaries and scouts that they've got heading south to find out what's happened to Azog and Bolg. And the news finally returns to them that both of them were killed, and that their ancient hated enemies, the dwarves, who the Snow Orcs of course will have fought long, long ago, chiefly at the Battle of the Nerneath Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, but also in various other battles in Beleriand. And it's this feature that then resolves the Snow Orcs to return to Middle-earth, to avenge Bolg, to avenge Azog, and to finally put an end to Aule's mistake, as they see them. I presume, I can make up what I like. We've gone on the very basis that the Snow Orcs didn't return to Middle-earth immediately because they've gone to the north where they found a reason to survive. They found a location that they can survive, and so why head south? And for all they know as well, the dwarves were utterly destroyed in the fall of Beleriand, much like their nation was. So they're not going to go on a wild goose chase trying to find the dwarves. But now they've got concrete evidence of dwarven mansions, they resolve to do something about it, and the Snow Orcs come back. They then return to Gundabad, where they find it, as I say, virtually empty because the armies have been destroyed and obliterated at the Battle of Five Armies. And they take Gundabad as their prize. And that is where Divide and Conquer then kicks off and begins the campaign. Some other little minor differences or some other little unique features, of course, is that we give Gundabad a king rather than a chieftain like the other Orc nations tend to have. And this is very much styling themselves after the nations that they will have known from the First Age, who frequently had kings and queens, such as Melian and Thingol of Doriath. Kings and queens indeed. So a minor little difference to the other Orc nations, that they take royalty as their name. And so that is Gundabad. That is everything we've got about Gundabad's history from the lore, and everything that we added in Divide and Conquer to make this faction stand out and be unique, and things that we twisted and changed. Of course, the key difference is that no Orcs would have survived in the north in the true lore story, and so this is essentially impossible. And that is where our greatest liberty has come to make Gundabad a unique faction, in inventing this northern tribe. The ability to even survive in Forodwaith is up for question. I mean, the Foreshell, the snowmen, they're not called Foreshell, the Losoth, of Foreshell, are said to essentially live, they're very much Middle-earth Inuits, and so if it's that frozen and they're living in igloo huts even just here, then imagine how utterly hellish it would be further north. It's very much the same as obviously Inuits in real life live in the Arctic Circle, but on the fringes, and going any further north is just suicide. But we've given liberties to make Gundabad unique. So there we are. And that wraps up the video. So I do hope you've enjoyed this. I know it's very, very brief. It's only a starter, but trust me, they will get considerably longer. And that's why I chose Gundabad, to give you all a feel of what the videos are going to be like. And if it absolutely is hated, then I've only put, say, a couple of hours into it. I haven't done an entire day to find out no one wants to watch these. So I thought Gundabad was a good start. And also it leads off nicely from the overview I did just yesterday or the day before, whenever it was. So comments and feedback are, of course, most welcome. Do try to be constructive. If you don't like it, just say why. It helps me out considerably more than being told that I'm an idiot, as I'm sure you're aware. But so that concludes. So thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. And until we speak again, dear friends, Navar Naden Perimad Melunin, and farewell.